This is actually 20 plus years of measurement experience. So I've seen the whole gamut. And we realized that we're using anywhere from like 28 to 30 different performance and programmatic channels at any given time. For the first internet bubble burst, I joined the first SaaS-based web analytics company. They really pushed the envelope. And this is why Facebook introduced conversion lift studies and some other things.
I think that the biggest thing out of all of using this methodology is essentially around grounding measurement in causality and incrementality, right? Which is something that has been...
This is a very human-intensive, time-intensive, cost-intensive endeavor.
You are listening to Full Funnel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Full Funnel Podcast. I'm Rohit, your host and your guide to the world of AI-first marketing. Today we're rewinding the measurement clock by about 15 years and also then fast-forwarding to what's next. My guest is Sunil Bhagwan, a veteran in the marketing measurement space, and he's also a sales leader. He's sold and shaped every major phase and wave of attribution, from pixels to mobile SDKs and now privacy first frameworks. And now he helps brands get a more holistic picture of what's truly working using causal unified measurement. Sunil, awesome to have you here. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and tell our audience what is it that you do.
Thanks, Rohit. It's a pleasure to join the podcast. Really excited to be here. So I want to just correct one thing you said. So this is actually 20 plus years of measurement experience. So I've seen the whole gamut. Let me give a quick introduction to myself, just where I started, where we're headed now. So back in let's call it 2001. I was a marketing analyst fresh out of school working for Intel, and then after the first internet bubble burst, I joined the first SaaS-based web analytics company. This was a company called Website Story, and our mission was really getting marketers to move beyond server-side log files and measuring hits on websites into more meaningful metrics that would gauge performance a little bit better. So we started introducing things like page view metrics, understanding conversion events on your website, introducing the first conversion funnel measurement. So providing some maturity to marketers beyond just vanity metrics of hits. And this was the very first beginning of this. This was an interesting time because web analytics was serving as kind of the marketing measurement source of truth. Even though today, if you look at web analytics, it's really more behavioral product analytics, understanding user behavior on websites, et cetera. So this was kind of the first kind of layer of marketing measurement as it started. Fast forward to 2010-ish, I'd say the first generation of pure play attribution companies really started to evolve to say, hey, listen, there's a better way of measuring. There's more specific ways that we can actually tie marketing performance to outcomes. So you think of like the New Stars, the Visual IQs of the world, some of these companies that were really kind of pioneering the way. And then, a couple of years later, I moved into the world of mobile. I worked for a couple different mobile measurement platforms. Mobile measurement platforms is a term that actually Facebook coined as part of their partner program. But this was the world of mobile attribution companies that were helping companies that had mobile apps understand where they're getting their downloads, et cetera. And this was a really interesting period of time because there were probably millions of apps in the app stores. And it was really the wild, wild west. There was no real standards of measurement. There were thousands of ad networks that companies would be using. In fact, I think at one point we realized that brands or apps that were scaled up in terms of marketing were using anywhere from like 28 to 30 different performance and programmatic channels at any given time.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of learnings there, and we'll dive into some of these learnings today.
For sure.
But then, moved into the world of unified measurement where we stand today. And this is kind of the evolution of a number of learnings through both mobile and traditional measurement and attribution, all kind of coming together to realize there's a more comprehensive integrated approach to solving measurement. So I've had the pleasure and the fortune of being able to be part of a lot of these different waves. And so hope to share some of the insights and learnings along the way today.
Awesome. Yeah. So I come from that world as well, similar, about 20 years. And I was one of the first developers of the iPhone apps when it first came out. So I've definitely felt the pain of measuring cross-channel, using these tracking methodologies. So looking at all these phases that has happened over the past 20 years, from desktop to mobile to multi-touch, and then now what we call unified causal measurement. Can you perhaps walk us through like the first aha moment that kind of rewired how you started to think about attribution?
I think from even the early days to some of the approaches that are still utilized today, there has been this dependency on building kind of bottoms up measurement insights and really trying to understand at the user level, stitching together what that user did sequentially to derive some insights as to marketing contribution, path to conversion, customer journey, etc. And this is obviously come under fire quite a bit. And there's a lot of waves and headwinds that have really impacted this approach. Obviously, rewind back to 2017ish, whenever the GDPR came out and started from a government level mandating that you can't necessarily do this by default. You've got to gain consent. Fast forward to 2020 when iOS 14.5 was introduced and broke the entire system, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about here in a little bit. But I think this fundamental approach of using bottoms up measurement has really created a lot of challenges for marketers who are kind of looking at the future and looking at new channels that they're measuring that don't necessarily operate that way.
That's right. That's true. So all these years in this measurement space has essentially given you this front seat for, where this conventional methods actually started breaking, right? Maybe you can tell us a bit about that era of iOS 14.5 or maybe even earlier, and when you realized that all these fixed touch-based attribution models were essentially fundamentally broken.
Yeah. This was quite a period of time for marketers. I mean, you think about the era of mobile marketers prior to iOS 14. These were very data-driven marketers. It was a new persona of marketers that we were dealing with that operated with a high level of just data savviness. So, I'm thinking of metrics that mobile marketers were using that maybe general non-mobile marketers weren't using, like, for example, measuring down to day 1, day 7, day 30 retention, really getting very granular as to, what is the performance of these particular channels and ad dollars we're spending in. When iOS 14.5 came out and Apple basically said the IDFA is no longer a guarantee, this really shifted for a lot of marketers. Marketers didn't know what to do. I mean, now you were forced to obtain consent from users. Mm-hmm. And there was this very aggressive language that Apple kind of forced brands to kind of show, like, are you willing to let this app track you all around the web? Click yes or no. It was a big roadblock. And I think initial thoughts were nobody would click yes. It wasn't as bad as, cookie consent back in the days. So I think we saw anywhere from like 30 to 40% of users would still opt in. Because there was some utility in the app and they weren't that afraid. But marketers were now, and data science teams were now dealing with a limited data set because you didn't have that full batch of device IDs and user level signals that you were getting previously. In parallel, Apple introduced a very clunky attribution framework called SKAd network. And if you think about the marketers back then, they were used to real-time insights. Mm-hmm. Apple basically said, one, it's no longer going to be user level. It's not going to be real time, and it's going to be aggregated. And so marketers didn't necessarily know what to do with this. And we saw a major downshift in spend during this period of time post iOS 14 as the market and the industry tried to figure out how to solve for this. Yeah. So, there was a lot of innovations on the MMP side to try to figure out how to continue to provide clarity and insights for marketers to spend within these kind of like Frankenstein, workarounds to working within SKAd network. But it was an interesting time. And I think it forced marketers to say, hey, listen, is the approach of using bottoms up measurement really solving the questions we're trying to get to, which is, what is the performance of my marketing investments? Are the channels I'm spending on delivering towards the KPIs we're looking for? And I think this was a big aha moment for the industry to say, we need to evolve beyond just user level measurement, because just because we can doesn't mean we should be using this approach. And this is where I think we saw a big shift from at least that segment trying to introduce more top-down measurement capabilities. Like you see a lot of these MMPs now have an MMM capability or some testing capabilities. So I think this was really kind of the shift in market that really allowed mobile marketers to evolve beyond just pure bottoms up measurement.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine those conversations might have been quite difficult, trying to, while the MMPs were kind of already adapting and essentially adopting what Apple and just playing ball with what Apple says. I guess that must have been a difficult conversation. Maybe you can share a little bit about that. How did the conversation change once you were forced to kind of take this on with the CMOs and CFOs? How did you actually have that conversation on where to put the next dollar?
Yeah, it was an interesting time as well, because if you think about it, while these changes were happening on iOS, they weren't happening on Android. For most mobile marketers, you were kind of splitting spend between those. Depending on the type of brand you were, you probably were going heavier on iOS or Android or vice versa, depending on if you were a gaming company, et cetera. So you still had a lot of signal fidelity from Android. And so you still had kind of everything is still operating. And so we can still derive insights. But it was a tricky time. dealing with heads of marketing to understand how do we continue to invest in iOS. And this is why I think the market scrambled to come up with capabilities to operate within the SKAd network and provide some sort of definitive clarity. The interesting thing was you now had this kind of multitude of measurement strategies happening across both iOS, which was kind of a culmination of aggregated insights, probabilistic measurement. It was kind of like this, again, this collection of the capabilities trying to come to a single source of truth. While on Android, it was still business as usual. But we also saw this becoming a really big opportunity for CTV. This was actually, I think, where CTV actually officially kind of got launched as a viable channel for mobile marketers, looking beyond just a traditional set of ad platforms they typically spent money on. We saw during that 6-month period post iOS 14, there was a slight drop in spend on iOS, but I think there was a slowly kind of getting back to business as usual once the kind of the tools and piping were in place to operate within the new SKAd network. But we did see a significant portion of new budgets kind of going towards CTV as kind of a performance channel that they hadn't necessarily tested before. But it operated very, very similar to mobile, very different than traditional linear TV, but it was an interesting channel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything started moving top of the funnel after some time. So that it's a great segue to the next point of a question, essentially around fast forwarding to today. How did you make that transition and what do you do today, which is essentially the blend of using MMM, experimentation, and causal attribution, which is what you call unified measurement. What made you make that leap?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was this was a natural evolution of the marketplace. I think it's interesting if you look back to 2023. I'd say this was like a major renaissance of MMM. MMM was kind of in the backseat before. It was this very like clunky agency-driven thing that big brands would only use, and you'd get a 1-year readout. And by the time you got to the insights of MMM back in the day, it was already too late. It was 6 months later. Yeah. And so it was always kind of looking in the rear view mirror. So this opened up a new opportunity of a whole new segment of companies that were trying to provide faster insights via MMM because it's a viable model. It doesn't depend on user level insights. It looks at the macro picture of your business and tries to help you understand with better predictive statistical significance, like what's going to happen next and what you should be doing. One faction of the measurement market that was really kind of driving a lot of activity and momentum. You also had this segment of modern MTA companies, multi-touch attribution companies starting to form that were trying to solve for the performance marketer that still wanted to move beyond Google Analytics and maybe get some deeper insights as to total campaign and channel contributions. And so there was still this faction that felt like this is the source of truth. There was this new segment of MMMs coming out. But even rewinding back to 2018, just thinking of mobile marketers, incrementality testing became the hottest topic in 2018 amongst mobile marketers. This was something that wasn't necessarily happening outside of mobile as much. Mm-hmm. But because mobile was so performance driven, it really pushed the envelope. And this is why Facebook introduced conversion lift studies and some other things. Right. But this is kind of the third faction of measurement that started to really grow in the last couple of years. There's a number of companies that are trying to make testing much more approachable to brands. I mean, historically, this is a very human intensive, time intensive, cost intensive endeavor. And so I think, looking at these 3 different approaches to measurement, all of them are good in certain capabilities and what they're trying to accomplish. I think that the real momentum for unified came when Google introduced their modern measurement playbook, where you now had, a very, reliable source saying the best way for measurement is to utilize multiple approaches and kind of triangulate the insights you get from one to calibrate the others to really kind of work towards getting a real view of what the truth is. This is where we're at today. And I think this is really exciting because for the first time, marketers and brands can have much more approachable platforms that allow them to tie in all these different approaches in a highly integrated way to get to a quicker source of truth that one they believe in. They believe it's truth because it's not just one particular approach, but it's calibrated across multiple methodologies. But 2, it allows them to speak more fluently with finance and CFOs with a lot higher level of confidence.
That's right.
That's how I found myself here in this particular phase of the evolution of marketing measurement. And I think that there's so much innovation happening here and there's so much energy around this that I'm just really excited for it.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing out of all of using this methodology is essentially around grounding measurement in causality and incrementality, right? Which is something that has been completely missing in the past. Obviously, the A/B testing in-app and all had different objectives to that extent, right? To see which user experience will help them convert better. But in essence, from a media measurement perspective, it was that piece was completely missing for many years, right? Obviously, it's done by the larger enterprises, but definitely missing in smaller companies.
Yeah, for sure.
So just touching on that point, this entire new unified model or unified measurement model essentially could be a bit daunting for some marketers who have been in the tracking world for many years, right? And who've been relying on touch-based attribution models to make all the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe give someone some guidance in terms of how do you simplify the explanation for modeling and experimentation cases? And in essence, how would you explain it to them?
Yeah. Listen, again, I don't think that touch-based attribution is totally off. I think there's a place for it that provides some utility for marketers. And I think when you're dealing with performance channels, and if that's your primary mix, there's still a world where I think that can make sense. But what I would say is for any given marketer who isn't using modeling or testing to take a step back and say, this is what we're doing with touch-based attribution, holistically representing our marketing spend. Because chances are you're spending money in offline channels, you're spending money in influencer channels, you're spending money in channels that don't necessarily have that same signal fidelity that you're used to, but that are playing a causal role in what is happening with your marketing investments. And so I would say, because again, there's a renaissance of MMM out there. There's a lot of options that are available to you that are not as resource intensive, time intensive to get to some sort of insight as to what is the overall incremental value of each dollar we're spending across marketing, and start with that. I mean, maybe you don't have to go full force into everything, but at least get yourself into a position where you have kind of this source of truth that makes sense, that represents your business, that gives you some insights as to, again, what is the incrementality of each channel that we're using right now? And then where you identify holes in that story or where you're not necessarily confident in what you're reading, use that as an opportunity to test, to run a test, to provide more insights. That the results of those tests would help you understand specifically at a channel level, how performant is this channel? How much more can I spend in it? And you can use those insights to then go back and calibrate your MMM model. And as a starting point, I'd say that's kind of your crawl before you're walking and running.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think savvy marketers today are really leaning into this unified approach. And they're not thinking of it as a one-time endeavor to run a model or run a test. This is an always-on strategy. Marketing strategies evolve as new channels come up, as new campaigns run. There's always an opportunity to fine-tune the insights. And so I think this is where we're seeing the savviest marketers really leaning into an always-on measurement approach that's kind of comprehensive across the board of these different methodologies.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And I think unified measurement also unlocks a lot of other use cases like planning and forecasting and stuff like that. What have you seen? How have you seen the conversations happen in terms of, the C-level decision making and their framework?
Yeah.
How does a marketer kind of expand those use cases to those folks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good one. And I think even if you look at the last couple of years with market downturns and kind of financial pressure, a lot of brands started pulling back on spend. And it was a difficult conversation with CFOs to deploy more funds because marketers couldn't quite justify what was going to come out of that. And so I think with a unified approach, as you mentioned, one of the big values is that you can better scenario plan and you can better budget and you can run different scenarios to say, hey, if the CFO says to me, hey, next quarter your budget's cut by $1 million, how do I deploy the funds that I have to still obtain the results that the business expects of us as a marketing organization? And this is where I think some of the power from unified measurement allows marketers to then run these scenarios, figure out where to better allocate their dollars to still achieve outcomes. Again, it provides confidence to them to go speak to CFOs and finance to say, listen, like we can operate within the budget constraints you're giving us and we can still deliver results to where we need to, and vice versa. Now that we're coming out of this market downturn and companies are starting to spend more, if the CFO says, hey, listen, we have an additional $1 million or $5 million next quarter or next year, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to utilize that? This is where I think the value of unified also comes in, because it allows you to say, hey, listen, we can run different scenarios and say, hey, listen, we want to optimize towards this certain KPI. Maybe it's ROAS, maybe it's CPA, whatever it may be for you. But if you give us an extra $1 million, here's what we can here's what we can bring with a high level of confidence, net new. And so I think it's changing the language between marketers and CFOs, and it's providing kind of an actual valid source of truth that everyone buys into. Because again, it's triangulated across multiple different capabilities that's really getting to the truth.
That's right. Yeah. So looking ahead, you had all this experience of looking at how the trends and patterns of the past has shaped the future. Where do you think this is all going? Where do you think this AI stuff and all is bringing, value to the measurement space?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's a work in progress. I think that unified is a relatively new concept in market. And I think a lot of brands are still yet to to embrace that. And I think I think we're probably a year or two away from this becoming kind of the standard approach to what measurement is. You still have different factions of people who believe in different things. Like some people are testing only. Testing is our North Star. That's all we do. Some people are, last touch, MTA, and that's just what we do. So it'll take some time, and it'll take time for brands to kind of showcase the value of what they're doing here. But I think what's really exciting is just the advent of some of the capabilities that are coming out with AI. I mean, if you think about a day in the life of a marketer, they don't want to spend all day in a measurement platform trying to derive insights and try to understand performance and cobble together reports that they can ship out internally. They're trying to deploy campaigns. They're trying to optimize campaigns. They're working towards their own KPIs that they want to get to. And so I think AI provides a really unique and powerful opportunity for marketers to query in natural language their platforms and derive insights. Think of how we're using ChatGPT. I mean, this is a learned convention that us as a humanity has just developed over the last year, really.
Yeah.
We've moved from typical, let's go to Google and search for something to let's use natural language and ChatGPT to get quicker insights. So I think this learned convention will translate into marketing measurement platforms where a marketer could just go in and say, listen, what was my top performing campaign last week? Where should I be spending more money in my next week's budget, et cetera? And just, getting those insights quickly and succinctly. I think that's going to be a really powerful piece to overall measurement. I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the future is going to be super interesting and super exciting. We're building quite a bit of things as well with regards to agentic workflows for measurement. And I think that's going to be a way of the future. Yeah. And so one final point on essentially helping marketing leaders with their next steps. Maybe you can share some advice for someone who's listening today, someone who's really rebuilding their measurement strategy and stack from scratch. What would be the steps that they would take or need to prioritize in the next 12 months?
Cool. Yeah, I'd say for any marketers today that are really starting to think about their measurement strategy and maybe rebuilding it from the ground up, one, I'd say first piece of advice is challenge the internal desire to build it internally. Mm-hmm. There's oftentimes companies feel like they know their business the best and they're the only ones who can actually build accurate attribution models based off the nuances of what they know. Challenge that assumption. I would say look for measurement platforms that incorporate multiple methodologies. I think you don't want to get stuck using one particular one that then you have to patchwork in additional pieces, which you will inevitably do. So, look for companies that can kind of provide that broad scope, and then test. I'd say, start small, build a model, iterate upon it, see if it makes sense to you, see if you guys believe in what you're seeing itself. And then if you do, continue to iterate on that through, we talked about testing or other things. But I would say, I think be forward thinking in what you're doing. The world is moving towards unified, and you certainly want to lean into it because it's going to provide better insights, better clarity, and again, a better language for you to speak with finance as well internally.
Awesome. So Sunil, what's a KPI that you check before coffee as a sales leader?
Well, first of all, I don't check a KPI before coffee. Coffee is actually the first thing I do. So I actually make my coffee the night before so I can wake up in the morning and hit the on button and it's ready. But first thing I'm doing is I'm logging into CRM. I'm looking at kind of the overall sales leadership dashboard. I am obsessed with top of funnel pipeline. So I'm trying to understand where, what we've created recently, where it's coming from, et cetera. So as a sales leader, that's the first thing I look at. And then obviously I go down a rabbit hole of looking at every different angle. And, I find myself on my second cup of coffee, digging into specific opportunities and whatnot. But that's just kind of what we do.
Awesome. What's the biggest measurement myth that needs to really die?
That's a good question, Rohit. I think there's a lot of measurement myths out there. Me personally, I think that utilizing ROAS from performance channels as a source of truth is probably a very misleading way to think about things for a number of different reasons. But since it's a lightning round, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. What's the most undervalued marketing channel right now?
I would say CTV.
Yeah. Awesome. What's a one piece of advice that you would have for CMOs who are building up their own measurement teams?
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. I would say biggest piece of advice is challenge the mindset that we can build this better in-house.
Yeah. And what's a future measurement trend that excites you the most?
I think it's the deployment of AI into the world. And specifically, I think beyond just being able to use natural language, automating insights into action, being able to take insights that are coming out and then automatically doing something, actioning something with that. So that's to me is really exciting.
Awesome. All right, Sunil, that's a wrap for this edition of the Full Funnel Podcast. Sunil, huge thanks for taking us through this journey from pixels to unified measurement, and also for sharing some of your battle-tested advice along the way. To everyone listening, thanks for spending part of your day with us. If this chat sparked a new idea, hit follow and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And share it with a teammate who's, essentially wrestling with their measurement headaches. We'll be back next week with another guest pushing the boundaries of AI-driven growth. Until then, keep testing, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next Full Funnel. Bye, Sunil. Thank you.
Thanks, Rohit. Great joining you today.
Bye.